got another episode, Jason. You and I, we've got a guest. Mr. Tom Rini is here. I'm going to have to do a little introduction here. And I joked before we started, I've got my notes because Tom has, No.
Nice,
Well, and we'll get into how we know each other. But Tom here is, I think, just recently celebrating over 25 years in the fitness industry as a fitness professional.
Correct.
He is currently the co-owner, I'm going to call it the head poobah, coach programmer of Black Flag Athletics here in Avon, Ohio, the gym that I go to. So that's why that name might sound familiar. He has a Bachelor of Arts degree in exercise science. The concentration is in fitness specialties. He's got his master's in education with concentration in health and physical education, both from the John Carroll University. I've had to add that. She's a certified strength and conditioning specialist by the National Strength and Conditioning Association, a level 3 CrossFit coach, certified fitness specialist, biomechanics specialist, and a USA weightlifting club coach. And it is with great honor that I can sit down with you, Tom, and we can talk. You and I go way back. We'll get into that, but welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate the time. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be out here with both of you.
This episode is powered by Thirdzy, your go-to for game-changing sleep recovery. Imagine hitting your workouts harder and waking up feeling unstoppable. That's what Thirdzy's PM Recovery Collagen does for me. It's like pre-workout, but for your sleep, fueling your body's active recovery processes without any melatonin or sedatives. Just one scoop before bed supports deeper, more restorative sleep so you can crush your fitness goals. Ready to experience the best rest and recovery? Visit Thirdzy.com and transform your nights into recovery power hours. Thirdzy, because sleep is the ultimate recovery tool. That's THIRDZY.com. Save 20% with code JASONZZZ. Let's get into the show.
Yeah.
I was going to say, in that mix, I looked at Tom's resume last night online, and I was like, this is a good amount of education there. And adding to that, the CrossFit Level 3, which I have studied all of the study materials for that. And in fact, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, I took the L3, having not studied for it. I took it as a prerequisite. I was like, okay, I want to know what the test is, and then let me go back and study for it. And I took the test, 160 questions in 4 hours, which is 40 questions an hour, which is a question to be completed every 90 seconds for 4 hours. We break that down. And it's hard. Man, that's a tough one. It is. I was completely overwhelmed at the time, just reviewing the questions and then jumping into the study materials to correlate or connect with the actual test. Every coach out there that has the L3 has put in hours and hours and hours of study, and had that head start of so much education prior to that. But still, it was just impressive. That's all I was going to say. I was going to jump in and say, wow.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I received the certification. I sat down for this test just over 6 years ago. I just recently got recertified doing the CEUs. But it's funny, you talk about it being an advantage, having kind of a formal education in the field. But, in a certain regard, because CrossFit is so specific, that it's almost a disadvantage in the sense because they're so specific with their terminology and how they view things. And, because my formal education was, 25 years ago or 24 years ago now, even a lot of that information has kind of been updated with the way in the strength and conditioning world even. So it was interesting trying to go back and relearn kind of how CrossFit uses their terminology and how they view things, et cetera. So a little bit of both there, but certainly out of the exams that I've been fortunate enough to take, it was definitely a very challenging and very thorough exam for sure.
That moves around. It has been kept there at the gym at times. And some of the books on that shelf, I know they're all good for us. I don't know what they're all saying. I have no idea. But and the knowledge you want to impart is important.
Well, that's the beauty of what we do, is that there is just so much knowledge and information out there, and there's so many wonderful groups out there that put together literature and research and take all of the things that we're doing, and it continues to evolve. And so, as a coach, I think it's really important to try and keep up with the most the most current scientific literature that's coming out, regardless if it's strength-based, power-based, conditioning-based, and so on. Ultimately, it makes you a better coach, but to do things that you were doing 25 years ago, I mean, 25 years ago, everything was a bodybuilding split. And not that there's anything wrong with bodybuilding splits, but certainly if you want to be an athlete, whether it's a football player or a CrossFitter, there's much more specific approaches that are going to be way more effective than following, some of the old stuff. So it's important. And then too, I think it's really important to make sure you have a sound foundation in terms of anatomy and physiology and biological responses to what your body's doing. That in turn makes you a much more effective coach, because now we have an idea of what's happening internally to whatever the stimulus may be. So yeah, it's a lot of information, but you always, again, as coaches and leaders in the field, I think it's important to try and keep up on that as best as you can.
Well, and Tom, as you talked about that, 25 years ago, there was obviously the bodybuilding splits. Over 25 years, how have you kept yourself fresh? How have you kept yourself updated? And even now, with the insane amount of information available at your fingertips, how do you sift through what is valuable for you to take and work with your athletes with, and what do you discard? How have you navigated that over the past 25 years?
Wow, that's a phenomenal question, because it is very difficult to do. Because you take things that were working for you 15 or 18 years ago, and this was really good, but holy cow, I just read this study that says that maybe some of that kind of stuff isn't as effective. So it takes a little bit of humility on the coach's side to say, okay, maybe we need to look at it from a different perspective. But in terms of the evolution of how things work, I think the biggest thing is, like I already alluded to, if I have a good understanding of, say, biomechanics, right? And understanding how my body moves in space, understanding how it controls itself in relation to weights that are being moved, or my body weight in relation to gymnastics and things of that nature. If I have a sound understanding of those principles, I think everything else that you try and pull along with it, whether it's a Basu ball or, doing chaos work with hanging kettlebells or whatever, the latest fad is, jumping on one foot while tapping your head while swinging a kettlebell. Whatever those fads are, if you understand biomechanics, I think, and as well as, the physiological adaptations and responses to what our athletes are doing, I think if we have a sound understanding of those principles, then you can decipher your way as you try to evolve as a coach. I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes, and Rick can attest to that as being kind of a human guinea pig over the years doing
Still
some
standing.
things. Yeah. But, you also have to understand the athletes that you're working with and what their specific goals, right? Because specific goals for a high-level CrossFitter or a competitive CrossFitter versus a recreational athlete are significantly different, right? So I think having versus somebody who wants to run a marathon or whatever the case may be. So I think, having a good understanding of physiology, having a good understanding of biomechanics and human movement will allow yourself to evolve as a coach and decipher good information.
I will be happy to share an answer to this question as well. But along your journey, what have been some of your biggest mistakes along the way?
Wow.
I just think it's fun. I think it's fun. I was thinking about my own mistakes, and I was like, well, I'm just going to ask it as a question. And again, I want to offer that I have a bag full, so I will be happy to pull mine out as well.
Boy, volume is king. I think that's something,
I've got that one right here. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially for masters athletes, I think that's a really finicky topic. More is better, I think, is something that we've all fallen prey to, especially in the CrossFit space. I think, intensity over everything is also something that we've all fallen prey to in the CrossFit space. I think not giving enough respect to the foundational and basic things. It's real cool to try and go after a 1 rep max or, whatever the case may be. But not allowing the time, not having the patience to allow those things to develop. And then, the gimmicks and the fads, certainly as a young intern at the International Performance Institute down in Bradenton at IMG Academies, there was just the start. It was in 2001, something like that. This was the start of training on unstable surfaces. So you know, we were working with guys getting ready for NFL combines, and we would bench press on physio balls and squat on physio balls. We had guys that could back squat 315 while standing on a physio ball. And then all of the literature comes out, they do some science, and it's like, it's all a waste of time. You're not making anybody stronger or more explosive. Training in sand to make people faster, you know, it's terrible if the idea of speed is in mind. So yeah, I pretty much made every mistake a strength coach could possibly make.
I was thinking of the analogy the other day of, you mentioned, you know, going in there and hitting those 1 rep maxes and how sexy that is. It makes me think of like, when I used to I used to play golf, and I was terrible. I've never been good at golf, but anytime I would want to get better, I'd go to the driving range, right? And then what do you do with the driving range? You just drive the ball. You drive. You pulled out the driver and
Get
you
a ton. No.
Just try and go happy Gilmore every time, sure.
Every time.
That the most effective way?
That's all you do.
No.
Like, I mean, no one. Look, the driver is you know, you use it, 12 times on a golf course. Sure. But the short game in every other club needs all of that action. And I was definitely one of those guys that I just loved hitting my driver, and probably why I wasn't good at golf, because it was the short game that really, you know, made the difference. And I think about that a lot of times when I'm scrolling through my feed and I see people's stories and, you know, hitting huge lifts, huge maxes. This is all great, but the stuff that moves the needle is really not sexy. It's getting on the green and putting for hours at a time, or the short game. And enough of the golf analogy. It's doing rowing intervals. It's not sexy, you know. As an example, I say that because I just finished rowing intervals, and there is just, and not even, and those rowing intervals aren't like you said, intensity. Oh no, these weren't not even intense rowing intervals. They were rowing intervals at a sustained pace. So it's not sexy, but it is something I'm doing in my garage. And it's like working on the short game in golf. You got to do it, but it may not be like going to the driving range and crushing the driver, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, again, if you're up on the current literature and you read some of this stuff, I mean, you understand, you realize that most adaptation is going to happen in that 75 to 85% range. So, you know, if we're working at 75 to 85% effort, you know, we're going to have more adaptation there versus trying to push it at 95%. But, you know, after day 5 of trying to push it 95%, you're probably pushing at 60% and just, you know, crushing any potential for adaptation. So, yeah, certainly.
Pull back just a little bit here. We jumped ahead, but I want everybody to understand where or how you got into the space, because you've been a gym owner for quite a while, and you and I have a history going back. It's not just 3 or 4 years or anything like that. It's quite a while. And what led you into that space, and then, you know, how you have changed or evolved your idea of training based on the athletes that you have, you know, that walk into the doors of Black Flag every day.
Sure. You know, I started my first strength coach job was as a student strength coach in 1997 at John Carroll University. Then I worked there with a couple of guys in the strength program, and then I got out of school and started my own little personal training business where I was sloughing around, you know, medicine balls and dumbbells in the back of my car, going to local high school. And I was very, very lucky because I had the resource of knowing a lot of young men from St. Ignatius High School here in Cleveland, which at the time was a football powerhouse. So I was working with Division I athletes, you know, at 21, 22 years old, dropping all around.
That does lead to a question at the end. I will come back to that.
All right.
Between you and Jason.
And then, you know, I was looking for a job to be an educator, to be a health teacher. And I had some opportunities come down the line, and high school hired me to be their director of performance at the time, which was sort of unheard of. There were a couple of high schools that did it, but, you know, I was in charge of putting together strength programs for, you know, all of the sports at this high school. 1,400 kids in the school, and every program from rugby to crew to, you know, football and basketball and everything in between. which was very challenging, but it also taught me a lot of important lessons in terms of organization and how to structure things from a programming perspective in a manner that's going to be most efficient. And then moving down the line, I got into the CrossFit space. I was just like everybody else. I had found a book, Ishtan Yabarek. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Ishtan Yabarek, but he is the godfather of complex training. So all those wonderful barbell complexes and dumbbell complexes that people put together all sort of started with him. And he had a book that I still have. It's falling apart.
See, the books.
It's actually at the gym. But anyway, but it was before CrossFit, but it was very CrossFit. Lots of thrusters, which he just called a squat to press, lots of snatches and lots of Olympic work. But it was the first time that I had ever experienced like lower intensity, higher volume, or lower weight, higher rep work with like the Olympic lifts. And at the time, I had just spent 2 years working with a guy by the name of Julius, who was a world champion Olympic weightlifter, would have been on the 1980 Olympic team, who was actually a Northeast Ohio guy. I had met him through a friend. And I was training with him for a couple of years and, got done with the Olympic lifting life and was transitioning into just being every day. And then I was at Gold's Gym doing thrusters, and a gentleman walks up to me. He's like, "Are you doing that CrossFit stuff?" This had to be 2010-ish. "Are you doing that CrossFit stuff?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Oh man, you'd love it. It's this and this and this. There's a new place that just opened up down the street. You should go check it out." So sure enough, the next day I walk into Black Flag CrossFit and 2011, and Rick is one of the founding members there. And
Wow.
Rick, myself, and a couple of guys. And, I think most of us are still around here all this time later. But in terms of the evolution of where we are from a programming and training perspective, certainly it's a huge, in my mind, separation between sport and health and wellness. As a competitive athlete, your motivations are different, your mindset's different, the way you train should be significantly different, and it might not lend itself to long-term health and wellness, right, for the short-term goal. Versus working with general population of people who just want to look good, feel good, have it enhance their life outside of the gym. We have to be a little bit more disciplined in terms of how we structure our program design in terms of volumes and intensities, and not just volumes and intensities. And we really need to determine, what our specific objectives are, with our training from a training perspective. How are we going to manipulate the variables within our training protocols on each specific day to allow for, or allow us to have the most adaptation, that minimum dose response, what's the least amount of work we can give them with the biggest benefit? Because really we have 50 minutes, in that hour class setting when you add in, our mobility and prep work, or maybe even 45 minutes to be effective as possible. So I think that's the biggest, thing where I've evolved personally as a programmer coach is having a better appreciation for differentiating between, competitive sport and training for health and wellness.
And you mentioned, well, I was going to say, for those listening, Tom has done both and does both. I walk in the doors of Black Flag every day. I'm following Boulder athlete programming right now, but for the great majority of my time, it has been programming that either Tom has done for our competitive athlete programs or has blessed it from another programmer, at the gym at the time. So he's had a hand in developing a competitive athlete while also taking the, 99% of the other members there and, putting the general population in their best position, every day. So he has had two facets of this through this journey.
I was going to ask Tom, as you are navigating both worlds and have for so many years, the general population, or the live long and prosper client. I mean, right?
Sure.
Versus the competitive athlete, which is the prosper at all costs as soon as possible client. I totally get that idea. First of all, that sport is so different, and sport is not about not about living a long life. I am a huge proponent of longevity in the sport and trying to maximize the amount of time that someone can do this sport. But at the same time, we're flirting with things that we're flirting with that fine line. It's always challenging in a competitive sport, whatever sport you do. The question I have for you is, how have you seen people, or how do you recommend when there's that everyday live long and prosper gym member that gets the itch, right? They realize they may have a little some here. They want to navigate to that competitive side. And we all know that if they just jump on to, they start training 2 hours a day on, program that they purchase online, it's not normally going to go well for them. There really needs to be a transition there. But how have you historically seen that transition, or what's been the advice that you give athletes that are every day and want to start to move into that competitive space? I guess it could be young and old. I think it's fair to.
It's a great question. I think that the most important thing is managing volume, and forcing them to, they have to create the necessary structures physically and metabolically, and regulatory in terms of, nervous system response and those types of things to the amount of volume. If you take somebody who's just been doing an hour fitness class, an hour CrossFit class, and it consists of, one lift and a Metcon every day, and then you're saying, hey, we're going to do a 2-hour session 6 days a week, which is ultimately, to your point, Jason, is what most people try and do. So I think the biggest thing is to gradually increase their volume, not even their intensity, but just start gradually adding at, a zone 3 zone, maybe zone 4 every once in a while, but and then get them to pound it into their head that this is a long-term play. You are not going to start doing Boulder athlete programming and 6 months from now go to the CrossFit game. But it's astounding after doing this for as many years as I have now, how many people I have conversations with who say, I made quarterfinals this year, so I think I can go to the games next year. And I just want to, and then I was asked, okay, well, what are your numbers? Where are you at? This and that. And they're like, well, I can, on a good day, I can do, 12 handstand push-ups. And I'm like, well, it's, you hate to have that tough conversation with them, but as a coach, you have to say, look, realistically, this is probably a more practical goal. And if your goal is to do the, make semifinals, it's probably a 3 to 5 year endeavor of consistent work. But that being said, I think the most important thing is just very, very gradually increasing their volume over time, and then start sprinkling in intensity as we go. The other aspect too is, having them being realistic with where they are, whether from a strength perspective or from a skill perspective. I was listening to your last podcast, and you guys were talking about how usually at this point for masters athletes, you pretty much just stick with CrossFit work. And that's fine and everything if that works for you. But generally people who are going from general pop and want to transition into higher level competitions, they are most likely deficient in not one, but probably multiple things. So you have to have the humility to step back and say, hey, look, if, bare minimum, I need to clean and jerk 315 and I'm cleaning and jerking 255, you're going to have to give up some of your metabolic capabilities because you have to get stronger. So we need to spend, however long, 12 weeks or whatever on a strength cycle. And we can try and do both, but the reality of the situation is, if I'm giving you a little bit of strength work and then, quite frankly, wasting your time by giving you a Metcon because you feel like you're losing fitness, then you really don't understand the process that's involved in terms of being competitive on a high level.
Is it detrimental to focus? Because Jason and I did talk about that, and I think I remember saying, I am so afraid to drop one to focus on something because I'm afraid when I lose metabolic conditioning, I'm not getting it back at my age. I mean, is that, and every athlete is different, I get that, but is it worth that for the older athletes?
I think it depends on where you're at as an older athlete. I mean, if you have like Jason alluded to somebody in the podcast about being brute strong and super strong, and the person throws up great lifts, but then in the lifting part of whatever the competition is, they crush it, but everything else they get destroyed.
Yeah,
I think that person needs to step away from lifting and focus more on the metabolic conditioning aspect, and vice versa. So, but if you already have the requisite strength, and assuming you're managing your intensities properly, and allowing for like true recovery to happen. And that's another big aspect, right? That a lot of people, they talk about, but they really don't do. They really don't allow for true recovery. So they're always working at 80% of their threshold because they don't know anything else because they're never recovered. But I think as masters athletes, I think if you already have the required strength, and ultimately you guys were talking about off season, but the reality of it is for, I know you, Rick, and you too, Jason, you guys are always kind of going to competitions and doing competitions. So there really isn't an
One
off
leads
season,
to the
right?
next.
Because you're still, exactly. So, an off season in my mind is you're taking 7 months off, you're not competing in a high level, and you are training all those little things that you need to improve upon with the idea of peaking for the open season or for you guys for the games next year.
Right.
So I think it really depends on the athlete. It's highly individualized.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I think CrossFit is one of those super challenging sports because we have such a broad need for skills and strength and capacity. It's
That's the beauty of it.
So incredibly broad to be well prepared for competition. You're always dealing with compromise. You're always navigating compromise. Compromising strength for aerobic capacity, or if you're going to work on this, something's going to sacrifice you. And even if you had all the time in the world, that wouldn't mean that you can just train every single aspect of CrossFit at all times at the highest level. Something's got to give. There has to be compromises. Like you said, there has to be appropriate recovery. One of the things that we incorporated in Boulder out of necessity, what we realized at some point, again, when you're dealing with a virtual group of athletes, you can't be there. You can't talk to them. Not all of them are going to watch the video that goes into the program. Not everyone's going to read the notes. So you could be as crystal clear as possible, but people like Rick as well, and Rick is not one of my problem children in this situation, but they're fat. They get in, they got to get workouts, they got to go. So they can't read like 9 paragraphs. So we implemented, in the software we use, we also can't put bold, it's plain text. You cannot bold any characters. So like, how do you communicate quickly? And I was trying to play with something, and I was like, you know what if we just color coded these workouts? We can't color code, but you can use emojis, and there's colored versions of emojis. And this evolves to creating an intensity spectrum. So really, at a glance, Rick, as an example, can look at a workout and see that this is so the spectrum is blue, green, yellow, orange, red. Okay, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, and zone 5 would be the easiest way to correlate that. And what I found in working with this virtual group of athletes is that a lot of people were going at red all the time. And that's just what we do in CrossFit. We learn, we go red all the time. And so I'd have some of these workouts where like, okay, guys, we're going at a 75 to 80% sustainable pace on this particular Metcon. And you have someone just blasting it out of the water. You're like, this guy is keeling over and dying during the rest intervals. But that's not the intent of the workout. But once we started color coding it started to train people. Like a yellow workout means that we're not tearing the handles off the ski erg on this particular workout, right? It's a zone 3 workout. Not everyone's wearing an Apple Watch and being able to see that, but try to be really clear about that so that in a given week, there's an assortment of colors as you can look at it different days. And honestly, for the masters athletes that we work with, there's only 2 days where they are in the red technically. Wednesday, which is before Thursday recovery day, and Saturday, which is before Sunday recovery. Because technically, if you have a max effort, even interval style workout, which is what those normally are, you should require a full recovery day after that. And then on the other side of that coin, when you're done with a workout that was maybe even 30 minutes long, that's a yellow or zone 3 type workout, if a coach were to come to you and say, hey, I need you to just do that again right now, you probably, although that time domain's rather long, probably should be able to do that, because the effort in that workout was aimed to be sustainable in that sense. But that's just one way we've solved that, trying to create the solution to that problem of athletes generally overdoing it, including myself. And I have to follow this stuff. What Rick does at 6 a.m., I do it like 10 a.m., but I'm doing the exact same thing and trying to stay within those parameters, right?
Sure. And do you think, and I don't want to throw him under the bus, but do you think that's sort of CrossFit's fault in the sense that, at least early on, and that's how it's all been marketed,
intensity,
and promoted, and again, I don't want to say anything negative about it. I mean, I certainly probably could, but I just feel like it's been marketed like it's funny. It's interesting. There's a gentleman who is at our gym who was a 4-time regional athlete way back in the day. And we joke that people still think the way they get really good at CrossFit is by doing CrossFit. And meaning,
isn't that funny? Yeah.
I don't think you get better at CrossFit by doing, constantly varied functional movements, across broad time and modal domains. I think that CrossFit, especially a high level elite CrossFit, is highly specified. And, so it's just, I just wonder how great coaches like you try, and I think the color coding is awesome, but how do you continue to get this idea across? Like, hey guys, like intensity needs to be relative to where you are on that specific day, what's going on in your life, what your training was yesterday, what your training is going to be tomorrow. How do you continue to navigate that?
Oh, I mean, it's incredibly hard because you can't directly interact with somebody. And if you see someone put up a score on a leaderboard, and you just know that if someone did do it at that speed, it certainly was, well outside. And I'm just not the kind of person that's going to go onto the leaderboard and make a comment to an athlete and say, hey, you
probably didn't follow the directions.
I think over time, it's a continual reinforcement, continual communication and education of the clients in our community group, in the app as much as possible, in the newsletters that go out, in conversations like this, literally reinforcing that point. But you asked, is it CrossFit that planted that seed? And absolutely, I just renewed my level 2 earlier this year. And I was reminded of the quote from Greg Glassman that says, intensity is the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing your rate of return on favorable adaptation. So that is injected core into it. And and it's eloquent. I love the way that rolls off the tongue. But if we take a look at how people interpret that, I think the interpretation of that is that every time you step into the CrossFit gym, you should be laying on the floor in agony at the end of every workout. And I see that in CrossFit gyms all the time, with general population as well. And I'm just thinking, man, these moms and dads at the 9 a.m. class don't need to be, vomiting at the end of every single class.
Yeah. Well, it's not sustainable, right? That might be the biggest teaching tool for your athletes is, if they're going to do that all the time, eventually time is going to win, and they're not going to be able to just keep going with whatever they're doing. So,
and you said this earlier, it's that if you go all out on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, by Friday, your all out is actually the equivalent of somebody at 65% all out. It's not good. And this was the mistake that I made when I was trying to navigate my way into that high level competitor in the masters field. At age 40, I was a very good CrossFitter. 2 years after I started, I have a knack for this. At age 40, I was pretty good. I thought this is my year to qualify for the games. And so I was training off of a free website. CompTrain was releasing free workouts on their website. No instructions, just here's the workouts that were like the equivalent of what Fraser and Katrin were doing for CompTrain at the time, right? It was like their elite version of training. And I just did it. I did it all. And I had like 4 people to come to the gym. We would all do it together. And by the end of the session, our our effort was at a bare minimum because we were so exhausted every single day. and I didn't make the games at 40. And I did the same thing through my 41st, my year at 41. I was like, I'm going to make the game. I'm going to make the games down my efforts. I worked even harder, and I fell flat because I was killing myself every day, not recovering, not eating well. And it was literally after not making to the games at age 42, thinking like, okay, you know what? I'm going to dial all this back, and I'm just going to train an hour and a half a day like a master's athlete should. There's no shortcuts here. And really calmed down. And at the same time, very much dialed in nutrition, figured out that recovery actually required you to not train
gym
on certain days. And lo and behold, I got fitter, I got stronger, I got bigger by eating enough food and training less. All of the things that we've just been talking about, it all works. But I did beat my head against the wall for 2 years trying to use intensity, or at least what I thought was intensity. It was really volume. To just kill myself and to make my body adapt. And it just stopped because it was underfed and grossly overworked.
Good. I heard a sound. But not looking at it from Jason's perspective, but when you walk in or when you sit down with your laptop and you're looking to plan the next cycle for the general population, what are you, currently, how are you looking at a training cycle to modulate intensity, keep people coming back, keep them healthy, and the advantage, I think, where Jason has the remote aspect of it, you can walk in and communicate to the coaches or tap somebody on the shoulder or say, hey, this is what the intention is. It's a little easier for communication.
Well, I think that programmers who are working with competitive athletes have a massive advantage in the sense that they have a competitive season. Whereas my recreational athletes, everyday athletes, there is no competitive season for them. So putting together, like you'll hear every once in a while, a coach talk about, well, we're doing this cycle and we're doing that cycle, we're doing this cycle for a recreational athlete. And the reality of it is, at least in my experience and opinion, they really don't care. They want to get a little bit stronger. They want to feel a little bit better. They want to have abs and see their arm muscles and everything, but they still want to be able to come back and train tomorrow and the next day and the next day throughout 52 weeks out of the year, 365. So, if you're training for competitive athletes, and, that's certainly a big revolution that's happened in the sport, is everything's periodized. Where, we have specific cycles and we know what we're doing and we're building ourselves up, and you'll taper before competition and, super compensation.
I love that word
that we talked about, leading into competition versus general everyday fitness athletes. They want to be able to exercise on a daily basis every day. So that's somewhat of a disadvantage. So, at least what I have done with Black Flag Athletics is, we have a 6-week block. And within that training block, you do the same things every week. It just happens on a different day. The other thing, again, is we also understand and appreciate that if we are trying to get stronger, then we need to train for strength, right? If we're trying to put on muscle, then we need to train for muscle. And we need to minimize what's referred to as the interference effect. Meaning that if I do a heavy strength piece and then I try and do a 15-minute Metcon, the two, I don't want to say cancel each other out, but it doesn't allow for as strong as an adaptation. So in understanding that from either one, right? So I minimize the impact of the strength work, and then I minimize the impact of the 15-minute Metcon that I'm doing. So what we've done is we basically have created more of a hybrid format in which we're able to focus on different metabolic components on that particular day. So if we have an upper body strength day, that's all we're doing, right? So we had an upper body strength day the other day. We had some overhead pressing, followed by some dumbbell bench pressing, some strict pull-up, some other push and pull patterns. And then we do some accessory work to take care of our joints, curls, barbell curls, and tricep extensions or skull crushes, right? And that's one day of training. And what we know about longevity and a high quality of life is being stronger, having lots of muscle. Those are really, really important aspects, right? Along with VO2 max. So, but I know from, the literature and the information that's out there, I don't want to minimize that impact. So we take one training day and say, okay, instead of trying to fit all these different pieces of the puzzle together, let's just do
Okay.
this. Then the next day we come back and it'll be what we call our mixed modal days. It would be a CrossFit style workout where we're doing higher intensity pieces. We have to manage a little bit more from a nervous system perspective. So maybe we minimize the amount of barbell work because we're on the bar a lot, moving heavier loads on that upper body day. So basically what you get on a weekly basis, we program 6 days a week. You get an upper body strength day that is accessorized usually with hypertrophy work. So you have an upper body strength hypertrophy day. You have a lower body strength hypertrophy day. Then you have 2 mixed modal days, one endurance day, which is a 20 to 40 minute piece. Again, a little bit more cyclical, a little bit, certainly at much higher volume, but much lower loads. You know, working in that, and we always give people the option on those days. We say, hey, you have 2 choices here. We can go zone 2, casual. Let's just move for 40 minutes if you're feeling banged up. If you missed a couple of days and you want to be a little more aggressive with the piece, then go ahead and be a little bit more aggressive with it. And then also understanding the value of high contractile potential of muscles, i.e. moving muscles quickly, right? Contracting forcefully. We incorporate one of those every week. So within a 6-stage programming cycle, we'll have 2 strength days, 2 mixed modal days, 1 endurance day, 1 Olympic or power or speed day, which the Olympic power or speed day is not always Olympic lifting. It's, you know, running sprints, slamming med balls, doing lots of rotational core work, things that in a traditional CrossFit program, we kind of miss. So moving in a transverse plane, rotational, anti-rotational stability, things of that nature. So it's definitely not your prototypical CrossFit style of programming, but it's evolved, you know, like everything else.
You learned.
What I love is that you rotate it, so that person that comes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, the gym gets to taste everything over a 6-week period. So I love that. I totally get that. In what I had a gym for 4 years, and bringing the bag of mistakes out, like I overprogrammed everything. But putting that mistake behind me, I love that. I love having a bit of a template, that an expectation that when you're programming, this is what we're targeting. It actually, for me, in that same vein, it makes programming a little bit easier if I know what I'm aiming for throughout the week in a total given week, and then you break it into its individual pieces, how that's going to spread out over the week. And then of course, aiming not to overlap, like you said, on Monday, if there's a heavy amount of barbell work, then on Tuesday, which is mixed modal, you're not going to try to be sensitive to what you did the day before. So you're not overdoing barbell work, or their hands are torn up, right? You just think about these different things. And but as opposed to trying to come up with something random, which was very much that very, very, very old. I don't think anybody does this anymore, but that, you know, out of the hopper every day kind of training is crazy. But I mean, I love that. And I love that it's a constant evolution. It's almost, one of the things that I've enjoyed getting feedback on Boulder Athlete is that while I can't see what Rick's is doing every day, I have a couple of athletes I train with every day, and I get to see feedback immediately from them. And there are days when, as we're training, I realize, well, we've overdone this, haven't we? I mean, we're totally, you know, we're all looking at each other like, who the hell programmed this? And then other days where we're like, so 2 minutes rest here. In theory, that makes sense. But right now, gosh, we're just standing here for 2 minutes. This feels like too long. But it's by being at least with a couple of athletes, and you get to see athletes in person, you have that feedback loop, which is really nice. And you can see that, you know, when your coaches are out there coaching and it all works out well, it's just so delightful. I'm sure super rewarding. And then of course, on those days when it doesn't happen, you're like, well, you know, we take that one in the chin and we learn, and our athletes are forgiving, and they don't even know the general population. They don't even know, but next time we're probably going to tweak these 10 few things about it, you know?
Yeah. Well, and it's always an interesting conversation when you talk about people resting too long. I just had this conversation with Mary. So they get running a little bit too long. And I said, well, there's a reason why. He's wearing, you know, a heart rate thing. And I said, well, what's your heart rate? And it was a substantial rest where people are kind of sitting around, are kind of getting antsy, right? And he goes, well, I'm still at 122. And I'm like, okay. So if we want a maximum output here for 90 seconds, right? I want you at 90+% of your threshold, and you want, are you going to be able to do it right now? I don't know. Well, I'm telling you, no, you wouldn't. So, getting people to understand that, like, hey, a power interval means you need to be powerful. And that means if you don't rest the required amount of time based really on your fitness level, whether it's you're looking at your heart rate, if you know what your VO2 maxes are and those things, but that means you got to rest 5 minutes in between intervals.
Absolutely.
You need to rest 5 minutes in between intervals.
And if you cut that short, let's say you're doing 10 of those intervals, right? It just takes forever because it's so much rest.
Sure.
But if you cut that short and you cut it down to 3 minutes, like I'll be fine in 3 minutes. At the 9th round, you're not fine and you're not recovering and you're actually not getting the proper dosage. You've now changed the workout and you're not getting what the intention was, right?
Sure. And there's so many physiological processes that are happening that people don't appreciate, whether it's, creating greater efficiency in terms of lactate shuttle or whatever the case may be. And people just don't, value or appreciate that. And to me, that's like the coolest stuff that we do. It's like, when all this stuff's happening, you know what I mean? Like, all this really cool shit's happening. Just let it happen, please, for the love of God.
Yep.
They don't. And the other thing too, going back to what we were talking about, I just want to bring this up is, I have a new appreciation for like linear progressions of everything. The whole idea of Western periodization, to me, constant variation for general population is not a fact. I think if you're well trained, if you know what you're doing, if you have a greater training age, you don't need skill acquisition, whatever the case may be. That's one thing. If it's you two, I don't. But if it's general population, I don't need that much variation. It's interesting. When an athlete comes to me and they want to learn how to do muscle ups, I don't program muscle ups for them once every 2 weeks, right? They get on a structured program for 6, 8, 12 weeks, and they have a linear progression to learn how to do muscle ups. It's the same thing for strength development, right? Because ultimately, all of our strength adaptations, whether you're doing conjugate, whether you're doing 5-3-1, whatever the case may be, ultimately you want that strength development to be linear, right? You want to keep getting strong. I don't think general population. So the one thing we do within our 6-week block is our strength work. It's the same for 3 consecutive weeks. Now we might decrease volume and increase intensity through those 3 weeks. We do that, but we don't change the movement. Right. So again, that was a little bit of a mental thing for people to get over initially. Like, well, wait, we did block deadlifts last week. Why are we doing them again this week? And it's like, well, this is how this works, right? And you go into the weeds of neural drive and those kind of adaptations, and people just glaze over and really don't care. They're like, okay, I'll do it. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go up there. But stuff's really cool, man.
I mean, I love it. I love thinking about it, and I love again this idea of training age versus actual age. These are concepts that I've dug into significantly over the past, all of this over the past couple of years, and learned so much. And again, putting rubber to the road when I'm now training athletes, having taken what I've learned, and then moved to simplify everything. It's really funny that you mentioned doing the same thing over time periods. For me, it makes training much more sensible. And for others, it just takes that have come from chaos. It takes them a little while to adjust to, like, oh, well, we just did this. Wait, we just did this for 18 seconds last week. So today it's 20 seconds, or whatever, whatever the thing is. But yeah, that's how it goes. And this is how, or when we talked about CrossFit, when it doesn't feel like CrossFit, even though it is, right. We're pulling all of these wonderful, well-studied, well-documented concepts into the training that we're doing, and then seeing that it works is super fun. But it's like that golf game. It's going back to we're on the green putting again. You mean we're putting from the same spot every time? Yeah, we're gonna putt from this same spot over and over and over again. As opposed to the way I used to do the way I used to putt, it would just be like toss a bunch of balls over here or all over the place. It's just every one I'm lining up just again, as opposed to picking a spot and working on that spot and spending an hour on that. I don't even know how golf works, but I imagine that's probably what you want to do, which is similar to what we're talking about. I'm just going to make up analogies about golf because I'm on it now. I'm on the golf analogy.
We talked more on golf.
Haven't played for
this
10 years.
Podcast than I think we ever have. This is really out of control.
We're two guys who do not golf.
Jeez.
Literally.
Yeah, I'm also
the non-golfers.
I'm also scratching my head because I've got to go back and recommit to everything because Tom's had eyes on me for years, and Jason gets a lot of feedback from me, and I've been known to cut rest short or ask questions why, and I'm like, this is good. I know you two know what you're doing.
You've cut your warm-ups.
Yep.
You cut your warm-up short, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
We know
I know
you.
Yeah, he's notorious for that. I mean, I don't know if that'll ever change, but maybe some of the other stuff we could get him to stick to, and he maybe get pretty good at this.
The truth comes out. You too. I know. The truth comes out.
It's funny though. You do talk about training age and now being an older athlete. I'm 48 years old, and I learned very early in the sport of CrossFit that I wasn't going to be good at it. So those who can't do coach. So that's why I delved into the coaching side. But I do think there's significant value in training age.
Okay.
I think that the older, more experienced athlete doesn't need as much of the same work to create adaptations. And I've learned that just through years of working with athletes who've been training a long time. I've learned that with myself, versus obviously newer athletes. So the argument I get when I say linear periodization, people say, well, conjugated training and West Side and all that kind of stuff. And all that stuff's wonderful. A, we're not training powerlifters.
Mm-hmm.
But B, those are generally people who have trained with a linear structure for a very long period of time. And, for all intensive purposes, and for lack of a better way to say it, their motor pathways have been burnt out. So they need a new stimulus, right? They need to change the loading pattern. They need to use bands and chains and talk about accommodating resistance and force velocity curves, all that kind of stuff. Again, some mom coming in at the 9 a.m. class on a Tuesday, it does not need to worry about that kind of variation. And I would argue that most, I don't want to say elite level CrossFitters, but most high level CrossFitters probably don't need that too. I've had a tremendous amount of success personally by just sticking with probably 4 to 8 week strength blocks where it's just a traditional, hey, we're doing sets of 12 this week, sets of 10, sets of 8, 6, 4, sets of 2, and having significant success without having to pull in
everything,
specialty bars and chains. And that stuff's fun, and I enjoy doing that. We do it from time to time, but overall, I think that for general pop and most people that a linear periodized strength progression or any progression for that matter is probably the way to go, at least early on and probably in the middle years. Once you get 10, 12 years of consistent training, then you can start doing some crazy fun stuff.
Get fancy. And it's what you're talking about, as well as that level of consistency. That consistency is what's going to end up winning that game overall.
1,000%.
And when you're at 12 years and you want to throw chains on there, it's cute, it's awesome, it'll look good on Instagram when you get there, but earn your stripes and then go.
But you're trying to eke out an extra 2, 3, 4 points, right? You're trying to manipulate the speed to get another pound out of it, right? Because you're trying to compete at the highest levels. And that's really the biggest difference, So it's pretty interesting stuff, certainly. And it's fun. I mean, how cool is this, right? You guys get to do this for every week.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know.
Every week we get to geek out on stuff we love.
My poor wife's got to hear me talk about it.
I was going to say,
rolls her eyes all day.
This is why we had you on, just because you are a master at your craft, and it was important to send this message. How can people find you? Because I do have a follow-up question, but first, how can people find you out there?
Coach Tom Rini on Instagram is probably the easiest way to connect. Or check out bfathletics.com to connect with us through there. You can certainly get our programming remotely. We also have a strength track that I designed myself as well. That's just 100% designed to, for Olympic weightlifters and or powerlifters to get stronger. So it actually originally started with a couple of CrossFit athletes who wanted to get stronger. So we just turned that into a separate track for people to follow. So, bfathletics.com or Coach Tom Rini is easy.
Excellent. And before we wrap up, here was my back to the high school question. Tom being, he's humble, but an outstanding athlete himself. And in his high school career, I want to compare this to Jason and the CrossFit Games. So, Jason has lost, if I'm right, you've been to the games, six years, lost one time, right? In your high school career, Tom, how many games did you lose as
we lost one game.
All right.
In my high school career.
4 years.
Yeah.
4 years. Okay.
Wow. 4 years. Yeah. We won, in that run, it was 4 state titles, a national championship. So I
was hoping, I was pretty sure, I didn't go do the math, I didn't go look, but this high school ridiculous football powerhouse, and now all sports too.
Wow.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Now it's all sports. They're very well rounded.
Well,
too.
Not that I'm going to bring up my kids, but the crazy thing is, so I was blessed to win 4 state titles in high school, and I won 2 as a coach as well when I coached there. And now my daughters play volleyball in high school, and they've won 2 state titles. And, if all goes well, they'll win a 3rd this year. So I still got bragging rights on them, but it's pretty cool to be able to compare championship rings and stuff like that.
It's something that
we train and we build titles so we can dominate our kids. That's what we do.
That's right. Well, a state title doesn't go anywhere near as far as a game title. I can tell you that.
Tom, thank you so much.
Well, Tom, I think, and I was going to say, at some point we'd love to have you back on. I think we could do this on a regular basis. And we touched on a lot of, the tip of the iceberg topics here. And it was really fun. I think it would be fun at another time to pick one and really deep dive that one topic and do that. I think we could have regular geek out sessions on
I'd love it.
Masters of Motion podcast. All right. Thanks for coming on, Tom.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Have a great night.
Thanks for tuning in to the Masters in Motion podcast. We'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach more listeners and grow our Masters community. Until next time, get bolder, not older.